I'm Rabbi Patrick, and welcome to Kihila. Today's episode is based around the spirit of the holiday of Tisha B'Av, which is where we memorialize the destruction of the first and second temples. This is a holiday that's lost to many people because the Reform movement of Judaism actually did away with it for a while. The theology of the Reform movement was one that didn't hope for the restoration of the temple in Jerusalem and the Levitical sacrifices and things like that. So this holiday of mourning either was diminished or just not observed, or it was more of like a footnote in Jewish history. And darn as I may, I've tried to bring it back. But I tell you, over the years, every Tisha B'Av thing I've tried to do has failed miserably. So hopefully this will be one that is positive. Let's set our kava notes. Let's set our intentions. Take a deep breath for me. Whatever you're hoping to gain from this. You saw the title was How Can I Love the Neighbor I Don't Even Like? And you're like, yep, I've got a person like that on my list. Or something like that, whatever this may mean to you. Just sit with Leviticus 19:18. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha ani Adonai. That's Leviticus 19:18. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. So that's kind of a big ask, right? Love your neighbor. What if you don't even like your neighbor? This is, however, the all-embracing or all-encompassing principle of the Torah, according to the famous Rabbi Akiva in Sefer Kiddushim, chapter 4:12. And you shall love your neighbor as yourself. He claims that this is the all-embracing principle of the Torah. Now, I might add, in that particular section, the rabbis are debating what is the all-embracing principle of the Torah, but I think a lot of us would probably be okay with this idea. Love your neighbor as yourself. That which is harmful to your neighbor, do not do. That's kind of maybe another angle on this idea of the golden rule. And it's interesting that all of the world's great traditions, religious traditions, came up with some version of this. So what do we do with that? How do we do that? You've got that person across the street and man, they voted for that person. And you just can't be down for that. Or they've got that sign that tells you all of the things that their household is about. And you're like, I don't really know if that's a household I want to be connected to in any way. But here you go. They are your neighbor. So what do you do with that? So I'm going to start with this first idea. Avodat Hashem, doing the work of God. It says that we are supposed to love our neighbor or love our fellow. It's supposed to love God, right? You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and might. That's a thing. So how are we going to do that one, right? If I can't even love the person that I'm not that interested in, am I going to love God? That's a biggie. So Leviticus, this Levitical code, what's called the Holiness Code, sets up a lot of these types of things. But what you find, I think it's very interesting, in the beginning of Leviticus 19, you shall be holy for I, the Lord your God, am holy. That's like a setup, right? That's the premise. Okay, and then it goes into what you might think of as things related to the Ten Commandments, keeping Shabbat, revering your mother and father. It then goes into caring for the poor and the stranger through payot, through the corners of the field, and no rending of unfair decisions, and you shouldn't hold back your wages of your labor. Do not insult the deaf, put a stumbling block for the blind, don't profit off of the blood of your fellow. And then it gives that sort of bookend. Love your fellow as yourself. I am the Lord. So there's a lead up. There's a premise. God is holy, and we are to be holy, and we are made holy by commandments, right? So when we say the rabbinic line of prayer, Asher Kichanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, right? Who makes us holy with commandments and commands us, it's that. And these commandments, these mitzvot, are sort of ritual, and they're, for lack of a better word, good society stuff. So the ritual stuff is the chukim, the chok. This is the weird fire, blood, guts stuff. Okay. This is the very Jewish things, the things that, aren't just about being a good person in this world. So that's the ritual stuff. The Mishpatim are more the Code of Hammurabi type things, the things that we can probably all get behind without any kind of divine anything or without a sense of a cultural or religious identity. All right. So that combination there of the Chukim and the Mishpatim, right? This idea of God is holy, therefore we are holy, that is the lead up to an ask. And the ask is to fulfill commandments which are rooted in loving the neighbor as yourself. And how do we know that? Well, if you go back and you look at this section, I encourage you to do that, Leviticus 19. And you start to think about what it would mean for you to have these commandments not fulfilled by someone else, right? So, would you want your wages held back? Would you like to be unjustly imprisoned? Would you like to be robbed or for your death to be profitable to another? Would you want to be insulted in some way if you had a disability where you were vulnerable? Of course not. And that's what leads me to this belief, something that I've believed for a long time, which is that love is an action. Love is an action. To love someone is a verb. Now, it is a feeling, okay? So, love is kind of like describing water, right? So, water can be solid, liquid, or gas. I suppose love is the same way, right? It can take on many different kinds of forms. There's a kind of universal love. There's a love for our own people. There's a love for our own families, right? There's a love for things we enjoy. There's love that's rooted in doing. There's love that's rooted in words of kindness, gift giving. We talk about love languages, all of that. But ultimately, I'm going to take it in pretty stark terms that love is an action based activity, right? You can tell someone you love them over and over and over again, but if you don't do anything for them, if you don't do anything kind, I don't know if you're really expressing love at that point. At that point, maybe you need a different word other than love. Maybe it can be, I respect you, or maybe it can be, I want good for you. But is it really love if it's not backed up by some kind of action? So, my question to you moving along is, do you ever feel like we're so polarized as a society that we don't even know who our people are anymore? And I don't mean Jewish people. I just mean, love your neighbor. Okay, well, who's my neighbor? Is it Lois down the street? Is it Edith, who's, several blocks away, who I don't live as close to, but I know as part of a friend group, right? Is it someone who's part of Kehila who lives 15 minutes away, right? Is it the broader Jewish community that's north of the river here in Richmond, Virginia? Right? Is my neighbor the person who votes the way I do, or eats the same foods that I do, or belongs to the same, email lists that I do? I think it's funny that now you can buy products. There was this one product um, that I saw posted online, and they were talking about how great it is, and you should buy it for all of these sort of functional reasons. And it says, and also when you buy this product, you get to join a community. And I'm like, "You get to join a community? Really?" Like, that's there's, like, an AeroPress community, like, I expect the people that are also fans of making espresso at home will, like, hold my hand when I die? Like, really? Like, they're gonna take up a GoFundMe to pay for my funeral expenses? Like, really? And I should say it wasn't AeroPress that was the product. I just mentioned that 'cause I'm having my coffee here. But it begs that question, right? Like, who is my, neighbor? And for that matter, who's the stranger? Because what if, for example, like in this little part of my community I live in, there's a family that just moved in town. Bought a house here. I've never met them before. I've kind of done the awkward thing where you like neighbor wave, which is a very suburban thing, I think. But like, are they strangers to me or are they neighbors? So that's a good question. And then what is the Torah asking of me when it comes to them? So here's what I want to do. I want to look at the first instance of the word Torah in the Torah. So very meta thing here. That's going to be Exodus 12:49. There shall be one law, one Torah, for the citizen and for the stranger who dwells amongst you. Okay, well, that's nice. Um, in the three Levite, or what we call like priestly Torah biblical sources, genres, if you will, the command to treat aliens, to treat the stranger well or fairly, comes up 50 something times. Why? Why would that happen? And, one of the questions is whether the Levites were part of the Jewish story early or whether they came later. Were they a tribe that attached themselves, having gone on this little thing called the Exodus, and just met up with their Semitic cousins back in Eretz Yisrael? There's a whole debate here, right? But it is interesting that the priestly text is very interested in a concern for being kind to the stranger, and considering that the Levites weren't allowed to have land, I think there might be a thing there. Like maybe you don't have land when you're among the confederated tribes. Maybe there's a reason why, because you weren't there yet. This is Bible scholar stuff. But anyway, again, it goes back to these Levitical texts, right? Which is what we've been looking at this whole time. Very, very concerned about the land and about the people and the people who reside in it, and making sure that the law applies equally to everybody. So, going a little further, this is chapter 19, 33 and 34. When a stranger resides with you in your land, you shall not wrong him. The stranger who resides with you shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt. And then this refrain that we keep seeing, Ani Adonai Elohechem, right? So I am the Lord your God. So when it talks about the Artchem, right, or the your land, it implies social and political power. Okay, it implies that there are these other people who are going to be marginal, right? They're going to be on the edge, or they're going to be migrating, or they're going to be um, maybe coming into a land to make a living or something like that. And in the ancient world, people were very physically mobile, right? This is a tent Bedouin style culture, right? There is sort of the carving off of land for agricultural purposes. And it seems like human beings didn't sort of just immediately go from a shepherd society to an agricultural society. It's even like today, right? We are in a society that is all about data, right? Moving one thing to another place entirely online, moving $1 billion from here to here without money ever exchanging hands, right? Everything is sort of in this synthetic kind of cyber world. But like we still have people who, write poetry, right? At least until Chat GPT gets rid of it, right? We still have people who, do things with their hands. So it's possible to be in multiple encircling economies at once. So you have both the shepherd Bedouin society and you have the agricultural society, which requires two different ways of administering yourself. Okay. But the thing about it is for most of ancient history, the stranger, right, the person who enters into your gates and all of that, um, would not have been thought of as someone who would be deserving of the same rights. That's just not the way it would have ever been understood. It isn't until you get into these moral reformations, right, that suddenly you have this idea of seeing people b'tselem Elohim, being seen in God's image, and as worthy of at least some level of dignity, respect, things like that. You think, for example, the Sodom and Gomorrah story. That's a great example of the normal human reaction to the stranger, right? What can we get from them? How can we harm them? How are they trying to harm us? Sort of things like that. Um, so we're told here in Leviticus that we have to treat these people who reside amongst us with equality. Okay. Now, this is, of course, an interesting twist of language because if someone comes into your land and they are being treated as an equal, in this particular case, in this particular world where you don't have sort of like immigration papers and, things like that, it's a lot more of a fluid system. You would go into a land and you'd respect whatever the laws are, but you would still be whatever you are, right? You don't have this nationality citizenship concept, right? You have a subject of a land, something like that. And in this system that the Bible seems to think it's going to be able to have, although it doesn't work perfectly, you don't have a monarchy. You have this kind of confederation of tribes. And you're going to have the judges and all of these people. But in any case, at this point in Leviticus, where it thinks this is going to play out, is that there will be this much more fluid, kind of anarchic system. Now, if you are a stranger and you go into a land and you live amongst the people, in this kind of system, you're actually not a stranger, right? Okay. Now, sure, when it's talking about a stranger, it's talking about a non Israelite. Okay. It's talking about somebody else. But, people can sort of convert in a way, right? They can join the Jewish family. It exists, right? We find it throughout the Torah. Okay. We find it in the Bible and other places in the Talmud. Okay. So you can kind of assimilate, as we might say, to Israelite society. Okay. And at that point, are you really much of a stranger? Well, no, you're kind of part of the peoplehood in a certain way. So this is where the Torah is actually doing a little bit of a 1-2 punch, right? If I have to treat the stranger with the same Torah, meaning one Torah for everybody, okay, if it's one law for everybody, then what do they become in some ways? Well, in some ways, even if they're not Israelites, they do become my neighbor. And then I have to love them as I would myself. So that's kind of the fun trick. Now, is that a perfect halakhic, Jewish legal line in the sand? No. But obviously, you get the spirit of where this is going, right? Judaism takes a gradualist approach to things. And certainly this is one of them. If I can't convince you that the Moabite is also your neighbor, even if they live right next to you, even if the families intermarry on some level, all of these other things, at least I can have you see them as an equal citizen under one Torah. To quote the magician, Pendulet, if we trade or do business long enough, and if we respect each other's rights long enough, then maybe we start to give ourselves the chance to be friends. And that's what is trying to happen here. Sure, you're going to have your tribe, your community, your beliefs, your gods. Maybe over here, you're going to have your tribe, your community, your beliefs, your gods. But we live amongst each other and we give each other respect and dignity. So, is that possible? I mean, I think it's a first step, right? E pluribus unum here in the United States, out of the many becomes one. So, still though, how do we love the neighbor if we don't like them, right? It's one thing to say, okay, fine, everybody has their rights, everybody has their dignity. I still don't like you though. Okay, well, Pirkei Avot, chapter 4 gives us a little bit of an idea. It says, "Who is wise? He who learns from every man." Now, forgive the gendered part of this, but just go with me here, people. Who is wise? He who learns from every man. Who is mighty? He who subdues his evil inclination. Who is rich? He who rejoices in his lot. Who is he that is honored? He who honors his fellow human beings. Okay? So, who is wise? Who's mighty? Who's rich? Who's honored? Someone who's humble and humbles themselves enough that they can learn from everyone, not just the person who you like the best, or the person who votes the way you do, or the person who, is also a vegan, paleo, whatever, right? Not just the people who go to your, yoga class or go to your synagogue or whatever, right? Not the people who fit perfectly into your category of life. No, it's everybody. You learn from everybody. Doesn't mean you have to like everybody. I learn so much from so many people who I don't think I'd ever want to hang out with, but I learn a lot from them. And that's a gift. That's a blessing that they're giving to my life. And I hope that I return the favor on some level. Who is mighty? The person who subdues their evil inclination. So we have this sort of urge. This is the, fighting and reproducing and scavenging, the scrappy part of ourself, right? The Yetzer Hara. Okay, this part we have to be able to subdue, right? Because when we get into a disagreement with somebody, it's never about the topic, and it's always about our ego. It's always about a kind of ego protection. I see this with couples that I work with all the time, right? Whose job is it to take out the trash? It's never about the trash. It's about someone believing that they are not being respected. Okay. You can solve for whose job it is to take out the trash. It's a whole other thing to deal with. Does this person feel respected and valued in their home? That's the real issue. So you have to subdue this kind of ego sense. Okay. And part of that is this question of who is rich, the person who rejoices in his lot. Now, I think that marginalized people can read this and go, oh my gosh, this is just you telling me I should be happy I'm poor. No, no, no. That's not what we're trying to do here. Okay. This is about how we all have a lane, right? So I have my lane. I have what I know how to do. And there are a lot of things that I'm just not good at. Right? I don't have the answers to certain things. I don't have those trainings. I don't have those skill sets, right? I am reading off of some notes of mine that I've made. I'm reading into a microphone sitting here in Midlothian, Virginia, and there is absolutely nothing I can do about a jillion issues. But I can do this. This is my lot. And I am rich because of it, because I get to do everything in this sandbox possible. And I love it. Okay. So trying to have some gratitude that you can learn from other people, that you can put down that kind of ego, right? That you can be happy in your little sandbox. And then finally, honoring the fellow human beings, okay? Saying to yourself, like, these other people in my world, they may come as a challenge to me. I'm going to push down my ego. I might think, well, I want more power, more platform, more whatever. No, I don't need that. I've got my thing. No one else has my thing. I have my thing. And I'm going to learn from everyone and I'm going to honor people for the opportunity to learn from them, even if they drive me bananas. And that's a gift. And so now you're saying to yourself, but I still don't like that neighbor. Okay. So here's a couple of things. I would say these are like Jedi mind tricks. This is Pirkei Avot. This is chapter 5, verse 7. Um, there are 7 things characteristic in a fool and 7 in a wise person. Now let's remember the number 7, that's a loaded number. That's the number for like wholeness, completion, peace, all of that. But here's what it says. A wise person does not speak before one who is greater than he in wisdom. Okay, so in other words, pay attention to people who know things that you don't know. Okay. And it's fine, by the way, that you know some things, right? That you know some things in that category. Doesn't mean that a person who like knows one more thing than you is someone that you defer everything to. But listen, that person who drives you crazy in your office, maybe they actually do know how marketing works, right? Or, maybe that person at your kid's school, like, yeah, okay, maybe they drive you crazy in one part of this thing, but in a whole other part of the PTA, like it's just, you need to just take a step back. Right? Don't try to speak over them. Let them say whatever it is they've got to say. Because also part of this, you may know the same things they do. They may be able to frame it in a way that's better than you. And so, yeah, maybe the information is matched the same way, but if they can word things in some kind of way that helps you, right? If there's a lesson below the lesson there, you don't need to know the same thing, but you need to know how to communicate the same thing. Oof. Okay. So don't speak before someone who's greater than you. Okay. Try to humble yourself. And does not break into his fellow's speech. In other words, don't interrupt people. And don't be hasty to answer. I've met a lot of smart people, and they're great at silence. They're good at just kind of sitting there for a minute and collecting their thoughts. And that's something that I think maybe in the Jewish world we're not big on, right? Because we have this kind of collaborative speaking where we interrupt everybody and the energy gets really high and all of that. No, take a step back, take a beat, and then collect your thoughts. Because also, too, if you don't speak quickly, people will keep talking at you and then they'll tell you more. That's actually a trick that you find in sort of the policing and things like that. Sometimes the police are better off just sitting and being quiet for a minute and just allowing someone to talk. And sometimes they'll actually talk themselves into a corner and admit that they're guilty of something they shouldn't be doing, right? Whereas if they had kept interrupting and interrupting and asking more and more questions, the person they're trying to talk to might actually be able to evade some terrible thing that they did. So don't break into your fellow's speech. Don't be hasty to answer. Ask what is relevant and answer to the point. So we have this tendency to want to look smarter than we are, or to prove that we're smart, or prove that we have a reason to be wherever we are, things like that. And so you ask the relevant questions, right? Be Socratic about most things, right? When someone says, do you want this? Ask, well, can you tell me more about that? What's relevant to that? How do we deal with that? Explain that to me. And answer on point. If someone says something, don't give them the whole bucket list of everything. Just give them the one thing they need to know, right? Keep a little bit of an economy of language at times. He speaks of the first point first and the last point last, right? So being a clear communicator, if I haven't gotten to this yet in all of this conversation that I've had with you today, right? Becoming a great communicator. These are the powers of a wise person. I love this line. And concerning that which he has not heard, he says, I have not heard. Meaning, it's okay to admit that you don't know something, right? That doesn't make you the bad person. That doesn't make you stupid, right? It makes you someone who is not only humble, but is open to learning, someone who wants to engage in the process. And the other thing, he acknowledges the truth. Okay. So sometimes someone can say something and you can be against, let's say, where you think they are going with it. But if you follow them in the journey of their logic and agree with them along the way until it reaches an impasse, okay, you at least were inviting them into your world and you were getting permission to be in theirs. And that is a very worthwhile thing. And that is an incredible series of Jedi mind tricks, right? So go over them again. Don't speak before someone who is greater than you in wisdom. Now, the way this would have been understood is about sort of a teacher-student type of relationship, but also just defer, right? If someone knows more about auto mechanics than you do, but they don't know enough about political science than you do, okay, fine. Like, let them be smart about cars and back off on all the other stuff, right? Don't break into their speech. Don't be hasty to answer. Ask what's relevant. Answer in a way that is relevant. Try to very clearly lay things out, the first thing first and the last thing last. And when you don't know something, you say, I don't know. And you acknowledge every time the person says something that is truthful. Because it says the reverse of these are characteristic of a fool. So, in other words, if you find yourself looking at this list and you're like, "Oh, yeah, I'm interruptive, and I sometimes go on tangents, and I like, I kind of feel like I need to be the smart one." Yeah, right. That's according to Pirkei Avot, according to the Talmud, that is foolish behavior. Right. So these are great Jedi mind tricks. These are a great way of navigating the world. Some of this you actually can find in the wisdom of Ben Franklin, who was very good at communication skills. He frequently would say that he would give answers to things by sort of prefacing with, well, I've heard, or as I've come to understand it, dot, dot, dot. Boy, is that a great skill, right? Because you're not saying, well, but this is the truth. You're saying, well, I've heard, or I've been taught before, right? You're humbling, you're softening your position a little bit. That's another way of dealing with these neighbors who you don't like, because if you're on guard, they're on guard too. And if they're coming to you with this on guard energy, if you sort of meet them at their dignity, meet them at their intelligence, meet them at their skill set, take a perspective that maybe you're there to learn from them on some level, even if what you learn is that, God, everything they believe is horrible, right? That's something you could learn. That's okay too, right? You don't have to make everyone your friend, and you don't have to make everyone agree with you. And also, maybe your opinion doesn't need to be heard all the time to everybody. What you will find is that if you take an approach like that, another line from Pirkei Avot, say little, do much. If you just back off from the rhetoric and back off from the arguments and back off from but certainly it's this way. How could any sane person not see it this way? How could you be, no, maybe that's not helpful. Maybe that's not actually getting anyone where they need to go. And I'll actually go a step further here. I think that there are people sometimes in life who they don't actually care about moving the needle, right? They don't care as much about the issue. They don't care as much about the work, if you will, as much as they like hearing themselves talk and being the smart one and having sort of ooh, I got you. Oh, ha, see, look, kind of moment. There are people who enjoy the process of getting to a conclusion more than they do the conclusion itself. I see this in the nonprofit world quite a bit. Friends of mine who work in corporate America will say things like this, that all they ever want to have is meetings, 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 but no one ever wants to solve the problem. They enjoy admiring the problem more than they do resolving it. And it's just because they feel like if you're not going to walk the path with them towards the answer, then the answer itself doesn't matter. I can't really give a particularly great example of this, but it's people who will get mired in the details of something, right? Like if a project has 12 parts, they're stuck on like the first part of the first part, and they won't accept that there's any other way that you could get to the same place. It's because actually they like the process more than they do the conclusion sometimes. All right. Another thing here, let's talk about active listening skills. By the way, great for couples, great for families. So, this is just something you can do along the lines of those Jedi mind tricks, um, that can help you with kind of understanding other people. And this is hard for me to talk about on a podcast format because it's something I really need to do in a room. But basically, it's something like this. You're listening to someone say something. So, what you're going to do is you're going to repeat back what they said as you heard it. Okay. And you're going to ask them if you understand them correctly, right? So you're always seeking these clarifying moments. So it's something like if someone said, you're wasting your time taking those classes. You should spend the money on something practical. Your father would have never wanted this. I don't know why I'm using this as the example, but this is what I wrote down. So we'll see where this goes. So you're wasting your time taking those classes. You should spend the money on something practical. Your father would have never wanted this. To which you, as the listener, might say, so you're saying you want me to spend the money on something practical because this is what my dad would have wanted. Am I understanding correctly? Okay. So notice that you didn't immediately go in with, well, I want to take those classes, or it's my money to spend, right? The money was given to me, or whatever, right? All you're doing is you're seeking the clarification. Okay. If you keep going and going and going and going, eventually you might get to the point where you suddenly realize you and this other person share the same values. But all you're doing is listening and clarifying and asking if you are hearing them correctly. You're not stating your own opinions. You're just kind of going and going and going until finally you reach some sort of conclusion. That is active listening. You know, I'm actually listening and I'm repeating back what you said. And if I say it correctly, great. And if not, then, I need you to keep talking to me because maybe I'm missing something, right? Now, when I say repeat back, there's a certain kind of personality that's going to say, well, but I won't be able to remember all of the words. No, no, no. You're not, this isn't ChatGPT. You're not literally like repeating back words, okay? What you're trying to do is make sure that you understand what they're trying to say. And so this back and forth and this exchange of energies can really help with dealing with tension, right? A couple of other things, asking, labeling, mirroring. So asking people questions I found is way better than statements because it invokes a sense of relationship. So, if someone says to you, oh, I'm having so many problems, right? You wouldn't say, oh yeah, problems are bad. right? You'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. What kind of problems are you having?" Yeah, notice the difference there? If someone said to you, "Oh, I'm just, I'm just really worried about what direction this country is going in." You don't say to them, "Oh, yeah, yeah, this country is just going straight to hell," right? No, it's like, "Yeah, well, what are you worried about? What keeps you up at night?" Right? You're inviting a relationship because now you're working on something together. So question marks, sentences should end in question marks half the time, okay? We need fewer periods and fewer exclamation points and more question marks. So another one, this is called labeling. Labeling is where you define how someone feels based on how you heard them speak. So you can pivot a conversation that way a little bit while helping the person feel like you aren't cutting them off exactly. So, um, it looks like, it sounds like, um, I sense that. So if a person says, you know, "Oh, today's gonna be a difficult day." "Oh, yeah, well, looks like you're upset." Or, it sounds like you're angry." Okay? See where I'm going with that? Okay? So you are engaging with them, right? Because that's, it's not really a question, that one ends in a period, but it's actually, inviting them in, quite a bit. Okay. If you label, then you're showing that not only are you hearing the words, but you're hearing the tone of the words. And this is another one of those things I think sometimes uh, understanding the tone is half the battle. Now, this may confuse you a little bit because you just heard me say, oh, well, more questions should end in question marks instead of periods. Yes, technically labeling is sort of, periods, but it's kind of asked like a question in a way. And you can even double up, right? It sounds like you're worried. Oh, what are you worried about? Okay. So this is I hear you, I see you, and I want to know more about you. All right. So that's asking, that's labeling. Mirroring is a bit of a spooky one. So this is where you repeat about 3 to 5 words of what someone has said. If someone says, just right now, I feel so lonely. Mirroring would be you saying, lonely? Yeah, I feel terrible. You feel terrible, right? So all you're doing is repeating back some of those words. And, I think sometimes people try to use these skills and they don't know how to use them. And so they'll use them the wrong way or they'll use them in the wrong order or something like that. But I've found that, this kind of continued inclusion, this continued desire to have a relationship in communication through asking, through labeling, through mirroring, right? Particularly in active listening, repeating back what the person said, asking for clarification, ultimately rooting all of this in a kind of humility, knowing that maybe those moments with that neighbor you don't like could be educational for you, they could be rewarding for you. And maybe, just maybe, that person is going to come away from an experience of you of saying, oh, I didn't know. I didn't know about that Patrick guy. But he is just such an open person. Like he will just listen to you. And I figured he was going to be one of those people who believes that thing. And well, no, and actually I think he could be a pretty good guy, right? And I probably haven't said anything about how I feel, right? All I'm doing is listening. So, the idea of the destruction of the temple was that it came about because of baseless hatred. My hope for you with our covenant related to Tisha B'Av, our intentions related to Tisha B'Av, are that the era of baseless hatred come to an end. Can you hear it, son? May it be so. Thanks a lot, friends.